There is a silence inside you that has nothing to do with peace. It's the silence of something forgotten, something exiled, a younger version of you, still alive beneath the surface, still waiting to be seen. Not because it longs to return to childhood, but because it was never truly allowed to grow. Carl Jung never used the phrase inner child the way modern psychology does, but he understood it intuitively. He knew that behind every compulsive behavior, every emotional breakdown, every quiet moment of despair, there is a part of the psyche that never stopped waiting for care, for validation, for truth. And this part doesn't disappear with age. You get older. You learn words like independence, resilience, maturity. You dress the part. You play the role. But somewhere, within the structure of your unconscious, the child is still curled up in the dark, wondering when you'll come back. You didn't abandon them out of cruelty. You did it to survive. Maybe you were told to grow up too soon. Maybe you were punished for needing comfort. Maybe the people around you lacked the tools to love you properly. So you adapted. You hid the tenderness, the wildness, the chaos, the curiosity. You decided it was safer to be quiet, to be useful, to be agreeable. But there was a cost, and that cost was you. You buried feelings that were inconvenient. You erased memories that made you feel too much. You silenced needs that didn't fit into the identity you were building. And now, decades later, those suppressed parts speak in anxiety, in numbness, in an emptiness you can't quite name. You've tried to fix yourself. You've read the books. Maybe you've gone to therapy. You've tried to be better. But the pain doesn't go away. And that's because the pain isn't the problem. It's the message. Jung said that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. What he meant was this: the psyche will create symptoms, emotional pain, compulsive behavior, depression, not because something is wrong with you, but because something was never allowed to be felt. And at the center of that repression is the abandoned child. This part of you holds more than just sadness. It holds your authenticity, your imagination, your instinct for joy. But because you locked it away in fear, you also locked away the parts of yourself that knew how to feel alive. This isn't about regression. This isn't about turning back time. It's about integration. Individuation, as Jung called it, is not becoming someone else. It's becoming whole. And you can't be whole if you've amputated the very core of your emotional being. The inner child is not weak. They are simply unprotected. They carry the unresolved grief you never processed, the questions you were never allowed to ask, the love you withheld from yourself because you didn't think you deserved it. And now, when you feel anger for no reason, when you push people away, when you crave intimacy but can't tolerate vulnerability, that is the child speaking through you. But instead of listening, you judge yourself. You say, "I'm too sensitive. I'm too broken. I should be over this by now." And that's the tragedy. Because the very moment you begin to criticize your pain is the moment you recreate the environment that wounded you in the first place. Healing doesn't begin with doing. It begins with noticing. It begins with asking, who did I have to become to be loved? And what did I lose in the process? These are not questions for the mind alone. They're questions for the body, for the soul, for the space in you that tightens when someone gets too close. You can't think your way out of abandonment. You have to feel it. You have to grieve what never happened. You have to sit with the ache of all the unmet needs and say, "I see you now. I'm here." Jung believed that the unconscious always seeks balance. If a part of you is rejected, it will find its way back to consciousness one way or another, through dreams, through projection, through breakdowns. Not because the psyche wants to hurt you, but because it wants to make you whole. The child you left behind is not asking for pity. They're asking for presence. They're asking for truth, for honesty, for you to stop pretending that you're fine when you're not. Because you know, deep down, that the life you've built without them is only half real. Wholeness means owning all of it. The joy and the rage, the clarity and the confusion, the light and the shadow. It means turning toward the parts of you that were told they were too much and saying, "You belong here." It means making space for grief, not as a problem to fix, but as a necessary part of becoming. Because there's no real adulthood without mourning the childhood you never had. So let this be the beginning, not of repair, but of reunion, not of fixing yourself, but of finally feeling yourself. That child is still there, not in the past, in you, in the way you hesitate to trust, in the moments you feel invisible, in the sudden tears you can't explain. They're not haunting you, they're calling you home. You think you're making adult decisions. You think your reactions are rational, your fears are justified, your patterns are just how you are. But what if that's not true? What if many of the things you call you are actually the voice of the child you abandoned, whispering from the shadow, guiding your steps, hijacking your emotions, manipulating your reality? Carl Jung taught that what is not made conscious will manifest in your life as fate. This means that the parts of you you've disowned don't disappear. They become projections, complexes, habits. The abandoned child inside you becomes the silent architect of your suffering. And unless you bring them into awareness, you will mistake your trauma for truth. Let's be honest. Most people aren't living from conscious intention. They're living from adaptation, from defense mechanisms, from unresolved pain. They're not choosing relationships. They're reenacting them. They're not reacting to the present. They're responding to the past. And the child inside them is still trying to get needs met the only way it knows how. By pleasing, by clinging, by performing, by withdrawing. That's why you overreact to small things. That's why you fear abandonment even when no one is leaving. That's why intimacy terrifies you, even if it's what you crave the most. The child in you still remembers what it felt like to be ignored, dismissed, humiliated, left alone. And because you never turned toward that pain with compassion, it never healed. It simply adapted. It learned to wear a mask, to smile through the ache, to call itself independent, when in truth it was terrified of needing anyone. And now, as an adult, you don't trust your feelings. You second-guess your intuition. You numb what you can't control. You keep yourself busy so you never have to feel the loneliness that's been there since you were 5 years old. The child became your shadow, not because they're dark, but because they were put in the dark. And the longer you keep them there, the more they will find other ways to be seen. They'll show up in the way you sabotage love, in your fear of being seen fully, in your addiction to chaos, in the way you seek validation from people who can't give it. Because the inner child doesn't need logic. They need something deeper: recognition, safety, presence. And until they get it, they'll keep reenacting the past in your present. But here's the dangerous part. You've gotten used to it. You've normalized the pain. You've built your identity around it. I'm just anxious. I'm just not good at relationships. I always push people away. No, you're not broken. You're wounded. And the wound is old. And the child inside you still believes they're alone in it. Jung's work teaches us that healing isn't about transcending the past. It's about integrating it. And the most painful parts, the ones we hide the deepest, hold the most transformative power. The inner child is not weak. They are pure, honest, raw, and unbearably real. That's why you fear them. Because they remind you of what you had to lose to survive. They remind you of how sensitive you used to be, how open, how trusting, how much you used to feel before the world told you to grow up and be strong. And now, strength looks like silence, maturity looks like disconnection, success looks like pretending. But beneath all that performance, the child is still there, watching, waiting, hurting, and they don't want to destroy your life. They want to be included in it. But to do that, you have to stop seeing them as a problem. You have to stop judging your pain. You have to realize that what you call overreacting is often the most honest reaction of all. It's just coming from a younger part of you that was never given the chance to grow up safely. Inner child work is not about living in the past. It's about healing the present. Because when you finally give space to the child, when you let them speak, you begin to understand your own life in a new way. You begin to see the why behind your choices, the real reason behind your fear, the hidden longing beneath your anger. And with that awareness comes choice. And with choice comes power. But to get there, you'll have to feel what you've avoided. You'll have to listen without fixing. You'll have to stop shaming the parts of you that still ache. Because that ache is not weakness. It's memory. It's history. It's the echo of every moment you needed love and didn't get it. And until you hold that echo with tenderness, it will continue to shape your life in silence. The child in you doesn't need you to be perfect. They need you to be present, to stop running, to stop pretending, to stop performing. They don't want a savior. They want a witness. And once you become that witness, something changes. The panic softens. The shame loosens its grip. The self-sabotage loses its edge, because the part of you that was once cast into shadow has finally been brought into the light. This is the work. It's not easy, but it's real. It's not quick, but it's honest. And it doesn't come from reading more. It comes from remembering that somewhere in the noise of who you had to become, there's still a voice saying, "Don't forget me." Something happens when you stop running. When, for the first time, you sit down with the part of you you've tried to avoid your whole life and simply listen. No fixing, no correcting, no justifying, just presence. A strange softness begins to grow inside you, not the kind that makes life easier, but the kind that makes life finally make sense. Carl Jung said that healing comes not from becoming good, but from becoming whole. That means making room for every part of you, not just the polished, functional, socially acceptable pieces, but also the messy, emotional, wounded parts that carry the truth. And your inner child is the carrier of that truth. Not the truth of facts, but the truth of feeling. The truth of what it meant to be left behind, unheard, unseen. The truth of how long you've been waiting to feel safe enough to be yourself. When you finally create space for that child, you begin to reconnect with something ancient inside you. Something you lost, not because you were weak, but because you were trying to survive. You start to realize that your anxiety was never random, that your sadness wasn't a flaw, that your anger wasn't toxic, it was protective. You begin to see the intelligence of your emotions, the necessity of your defenses, and the logic of your pain. The child you once rejected becomes a guide. And with that reunion, something in you shifts. You stop needing to pretend. You stop needing to earn your worth through performance. You stop measuring your value through productivity or external approval. Because when you accept the part of you that was once rejected, you no longer live in fear of rejection. You reclaim the authority you gave away. You begin to belong to yourself. But this isn't a straight path. Integration is not a destination. It's a lifelong practice. There will be days when the old patterns return, when fear creeps in, when you doubt your progress. That's not failure. That's the nature of healing. It comes in waves. And every time you return to that inner space with compassion, you deepen your connection with your real self. The real self is not perfect. It's not always kind or confident, but it is honest. It is present. It doesn't rely on roles to feel real. It doesn't need permission to exist. It simply is. And the more you live from that place, the less energy you waste trying to be who you're not. The less you perform, the less you chase love. Because love, when you're whole, becomes something you embody, not something you beg for. Jung believed that every person contains an inner self that longs for expression. Not the ego, which seeks validation, but the self, which seeks unity. And the inner child is not separate from the self. They are its seed. Your ability to feel joy, to play, to imagine, to love without strategy, all of that lives in the child you once silenced. And when you bring that child home, you bring your life back into alignment. Suddenly, your boundaries become clearer, not as walls, but as sacred space. Your relationships become deeper, not because you're trying harder, but because you're showing up as you are. Your creativity returns, not as a skill, but as a natural expression of wholeness. And your presence becomes healing, not just for you, but for everyone you meet, because something in you is no longer afraid to be seen. This is what happens when you stop identifying with your wound and start integrating it. You stop living from pain and start living with awareness. The wound doesn't disappear, but it no longer defines you. It becomes part of your story, not your sentence. And in that space, life begins to flow differently. You make choices that align with your truth. You say no without guilt. You say yes without fear. You stop abandoning yourself just to be accepted. That's not a small shift. That's a revolution. And it begins with something so simple, so human, so easily missed. The willingness to sit with your pain, not to drown in it, but to understand it. The willingness to ask the question, what did I lose in order to be loved? And the courage to give it back to yourself now. You were never too much. You were never too emotional, too sensitive, too complicated. You were just too real for a world that asked you to pretend. And now, you no longer have to. You can be soft and strong. You can be wounded and wise. You can carry the child and still be the adult. That's what wholeness looks like. When Jung spoke of individuation, he wasn't describing a perfect life. He was describing an authentic one. A life where your outer reality reflects your inner truth. A life where nothing is denied, nothing is exiled, and everything has a place, even the brokenness, even the pain, especially the pain. Because pain is what opens the door. Pain is what forces you to go deeper. Pain is not the enemy, it's the signal. And when you follow that signal inward, when you sit with it instead of escaping, you don't just find suffering, you find yourself. So now you have a choice. You can keep running from the voice inside you, or you can turn toward it and finally say, I hear you, I see you, I'm not leaving again. The child you left behind isn't waiting for perfection. They're waiting for love. Your love, the kind that says, you belong here. All of you, always.